Why, when modern tourists often freeze in high-tech tents, did the indigenous inhabitants of the plains sleep peacefully in dwellings made of simple skins in the midst of raging elements? History knows many examples when military expeditions and settlers, equipped with the latest technology of their time, perished in the same conditions where Native Americans had lived for centuries in relative comfort. The secret of their survival lay not in superhuman physical endurance or magic, but in a unique, centuries-old, refined engineering system of daily life. It was not just the ability to endure the cold, but a whole science of how to use the laws of physics to create a warm microclimate in the epicenter of an icy hell. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how ancient technologies of thermal insulation and ventilation allowed them to create a temperature inside their dwellings that was comfortable for sleeping without sleeping bags. What if I told you that survival began long before the first snowflakes fell from the sky? On the endless plains, where the horizon stretches for tens of kilometers, the ability to predict the weather was more important than having warm clothes. Experienced people noticed subtle changes in the color of the sky, which took on a leaden or milky white hue before a heavy snowstorm. They paid attention to acoustic anomalies when sounds began to travel unnaturally long distances, or conversely, were muffled. Even the direction and taste of the wind could tell them that in a few hours the world would turn into an icy desert. The ability to make quick decisions was a critical feature of nomadic life. As soon as the signs pointed to the approach of a northern blow, the tribe immediately stopped moving, no matter how important the destination was. Continuing on in the hope of outrunning the storm was considered the height of recklessness and a sure death sentence. The leaders of the group instantly shifted their attention from the route to finding a suitable place to camp. This decision was made without lengthy deliberation, as time was literally counting down by the minute. The ideal place for a winter camp was never chosen at random or simply because it was beautiful. People looked for natural depressions, ravines, or riverbeds protected by high banks. These folds in the terrain served as the first and main barrier against the piercing wind, which was the main killer on the plains. If a grove of trees could be found, the camp was set up under their cover, but with safety in mind to avoid falling old trunks. An open hilltop was a death sentence, as the wind encountered no obstacles there. Orientation in space when setting up camp had both sacred and practical significance. The entrance to the dwelling was always, without exception, located on the east side, facing the rising sun. This rule was dictated by the prevailing westerly winds, which carried the main snow loads. If the entrance faced west or north, the first gust of wind could tear off the canopy and blow snowdrifts inside. The eastern orientation ensured that even in the strongest storm, the exit would remain free and protected from the direct force of the elements. The speed with which the dwelling was erected in anticipation of the storm amazed the first European observers. The women, who were traditionally responsible for building and furnishing the house, worked like a well-oiled machine, clearing the site of old snow, installing poles, and stretching heavy covers took surprisingly little time. Everyone knew their task, and unnecessary words were unnecessary, as the cold was already beginning to numb their fingers. The coordination of these actions determined whether the community would be able to take shelter before visibility dropped to zero. Particular attention was paid to securing the base of the dwelling, which had to withstand hurricane-force winds. Ordinary wooden pegs in frozen ground might not hold the structure under the pressure of the wind. Therefore, in winter, heavy stones were often used, which were laid around the perimeter of the cover, pressing it tightly to the ground. If there were no stones, special, longer stakes were used, which were driven in at an angle. This created a reliable anchor capable of withstanding the enormous wind resistance of the leather walls. Inside the dwelling, preparations for prolonged isolation from the outside world began immediately. All necessary items, fuel and food supplies were brought inside before the entrance was tightly closed. Nothing was left outside that could be blown away by the wind or buried under a layer of snow several meters thick. This was the moment of transition from active activity to a mode of conserving energy and heat. The space inside was strictly zoned so that every object and person was in its place. Psychological preparation was no less important than physical protection from the cold. People prepared themselves for the fact that in the coming days, their world would shrink to the size of a small circle around the hearth. Panic and fuss were unacceptable, as they led to mistakes and unnecessary waste of precious heat. The calmness and confidence of the elders was passed on to the rest of the group. The blizzard was perceived not as an enemy, but as an inevitable natural phenomenon that simply had to be waited out. The final touch in the preparations was to check all the fastenings and valves. The smoke valves at the top of the dwelling were set so that the wind would not blow smoke inside, but at the same time the draft would be maintained. The entrance canopy was carefully sealed to eliminate the slightest drafts. When all the preparations were complete, nature could rage as much as it wanted. The people were ready. How much do you think modern weather forecasts have made us less vigilant compared to the Native Americans? I'm very interested to hear your point of view. Write about it in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of primitive architecture? The shape of a teepee is not just a tribute to tradition or simplicity of design, but a brilliant engineering solution for windy plains. The cone is one of the most aerodynamic shapes known to mankind, perfectly streamlined on all sides. When the wind hits the sloping surface, it does not press against it with all its force, but smoothly curves around it, moving to the sides. This allowed the dwelling to withstand hurricane-force gusts that easily destroyed the rectangular buildings of Europeans. However, the cone of the Tipi was not perfectly symmetrical, as many people tend to think when looking at pictures. The back wall of the dwelling was steeper and more vertical than the front, which created a special geometry. This shift in the center of gravity and the slope of the poles made the structure more resistant to the prevailing westerly winds. The wind slid down the sloping part, pressing the structure to the ground instead of trying to knock it over. This asymmetry was the result of centuries of observation and experimentation with form. The poles that served as the frame were not rigidly fixed in the ground like the piles of a modern house. They were placed on the surface, forming a flexible structure capable of breathing under the pressure of the elements. In the strong gusts of wind, the frame deformed slightly, cushioning the impact, and then returned to its original position. A rigid structure would simply break under such conditions, while flexibility provided a margin of safety. The wood for the poles was specially selected to meet these elasticity requirements. The cover made of sewn bison skins was stretched over the frame with great effort, becoming as tight as a drum. Loosely stretched leather would begin to vibrate and flap in the wind, which would quickly lead to tears in the material. The smooth surface of the leather prevented the wind from catching on any unevenness, reducing drag. In winter, the covering could be double or thickened by leaving the wool on the hides. The seams were coated with grease for complete waterproofing and protection against wind. The top of the teepee with smoke vents was the most complex element of the aerodynamic system. Two movable valves, controlled by long poles from the outside, worked like airplane flaps. Their position was constantly changed depending on the direction of the wind to create a zone of low pressure above the smoke vent. This ensured that smoke was drawn out of the hearth even under the strongest external wind pressure. If the valves were set incorrectly, the dwelling would instantly fill with acrid smoke. In the center of the dwelling, from the point where the poles joined the ground, a special anchor rope was often stretched. During particularly strong storms, this rope was tied to a stake driven into the ground or a heavy load in the center of the hearth. This created an additional point of support and prevented the wind from lifting the structure into the air. This solution turned a light portable dwelling into a real monolith. The weight of the tire itself also acted as a gravitational anchor. Unlike tents with flat walls, teepees did not have sail surfaces that would take the brunt of the impact at a right angle. Any wind encountered an inclined surface, the force vector of which was directed downward toward the ground. The stronger the wind blew, the harder it pressed the dwelling to the ground. This paradoxical property made staying inside during a storm surprisingly safe. The walls could shake and hum, but they stood firm. The oval shape of the base, elongated along the axis of the wind, also contributed to better aerodynamics. The Indians never placed their dwellings with the wide side facing the wind, intuitively understanding the principles of aerodynamics. The arrangement of the tipis in the camp was not chaotic either. They were placed so that one dwelling did not create turbulence for another. It was a collective approach to protection from the elements. Even the arrangement of carts and belongings around the camp served as an additional windbreak. It is interesting to note that modern architects often study the shape of teepees when designing buildings for extreme conditions. The principles of wind load distribution discovered by indigenous peoples remain relevant even in the age of computer modeling. This proves that observing nature often yields more effective solutions than complex mathematical calculations. Simplicity here is synonymous with reliability and functionality. Aerodynamics is only the outer shell of protection, but the most interesting things happen inside. Do you think a piece of fabric can replace a thick brick wall in terms of thermal insulation? In the next chapter, you will learn about the secret weapon of Native American interior design. Are you ready for the shocking truth that Native Americans used the principle of double glazing hundreds of years before it was invented? The main secret to warmth in a winter dwelling was not the thickness of the outer walls, but a special interior lining called ozon or rosa. This piece of leather or thick fabric was attached to poles inside the teepee, starting from the ground and rising to human height. It created a second wall, forming a closed airspace between the outer covering and the living area. It was this air layer that acted as a powerful heat insulator. Cold air that penetrated under the outer edge of the covering did not immediately enter the living space. It remained behind the barrier of the inner lining and, heated by the warmth of the fire, rose up along the outer wall. This flow created a draft, carrying smoke up to the opening at the top, and at the same time served as a thermal curtain. The living area was reliably protected from direct drafts and contact with the icy outer wall. Inside this cocoon, the air was still and warm. The interior cladding performed another critically important function, controlling humidity and condensation. In any heated room in winter, moisture forms on cold walls, which could drip onto the inhabitants and their beds. The dew cloth caught this moisture. Condensation settled on the outer covering and dripped down to the ground, bypassing the living space. The very name dew cloth indicates that the Indians understood this physical phenomenon perfectly well. Dryness inside was the key to warmth and health. The upper part of the living space was often covered with a horizontal canopy called an ozon. It was stretched over the sleeping areas and the recreation area, cutting off the high dome of the teepee. This reduced the volume of the heated space, allowing heat to accumulate below, where the people were. In addition, the ozon protected against possible drops of rain or snow that could penetrate through the smoke hole. The result was a room within a room with its own microclimate. The material for the interior lining was often decorated with drawings depicting the exploits of the owner or the history of the family. But in addition to aesthetics, the layer of paint and the dense structure of the leather served as an additional barrier to radiant cold. The heat from the fire, reflecting off the lining, returned to the center of the dwelling, creating a reflector effect. This allowed even a small fire to be used effectively to heat the entire space. Without this detail, the teepee would have been nothing more than a drafty tent. The lower edge of the inner lining was carefully tucked inside and pressed against the ground with bedding and belongings. This sealed the living capsule from below, preventing cold air from spreading across the floor. The floor inside the teepee was thus protected from freezing around the perimeter. The ground under the hearth warmed up and became a heat accumulator, giving off heat at night. A comprehensive approach to insulation eliminated cold bridges. Interestingly, this system allowed ventilation to be adjusted as needed. By raising or lowering the edge of the cladding, it was possible to increase the flow of fresh air for the fire. It was not a static but a dynamic climate control system. Residents could fine-tune the parameters of their dwelling in response to changes in wind or temperature outside. Controlling airflows was an art. The temperature difference between the inside and outside of such a structure could reach astonishing levels. When it was -30 outside, inside, thanks to the double walls and the hearth, it was possible to sit in light clothing. This created psychological comfort and a feeling of complete safety in the midst of a storm. The house became not just a shelter, but a warm island of life. The double skin technology was an ingenious response to the challenges of the climate. The efficiency of this system was such that even after the fire died down, The heat was retained for a long time. The air layer worked like a thermos, slowly releasing the accumulated energy. This allowed people to sleep peacefully for part of the night without having to constantly add wood to the fire. In the morning, the room quickly warmed up again after the fire was lit. The heat cycle was continuous and controllable. This ancient technology demonstrates a deep understanding of the laws of thermodynamics by people who did not have written physics textbooks. If you enjoy learning about such forgotten technologies, be sure to like this video. What if I told you that a fire inside a house is not a fire hazard, but a sophisticated ventilation machine? The fire in the center of the teepee was the heart of the dwelling, but controlling it during a blizzard required special skill. The main task was not to create a giant flame, but to maintain and even burn with minimal smoke. To do this, specially selected dry wood was used, which produced a lot of heat and little soot, such as hard deciduous species. Coniferous trees which shoot sparks were avoided so as not to burn the skins. The design of the hearth was not just a pile of wood on the ground, but a small depression lined with stones. The stones heated up and served as a heat accumulator, continuing to radiate gentle heat even when the flames died down. This was critically important in the morning, when the fire naturally weakened. The location of the fire directly under the smoke hole ensured a vertical column of hot air. Any displacement could disrupt the draft and fill the room with smoke. During heavy snowstorms, when the wind could blow into the smoke hole, special techniques were used to stack the wood. The logs were placed vertically in a teepee shape, which created a more concentrated and higher column of flame. This intensified the upward flow of air, which broke through the plug of cold air at the outlet. Horizontal stacking produced more smoke and less draft, which was unacceptable in a storm. The art of firemaking was the art of survival. The smoke valves we mentioned earlier were adjusted from the inside with poles if it was impossible to go outside. An experienced resident could tell by the sound of the wind and the behavior of the smoke which valve needed to be closed and which needed to be opened wider. This constant interaction with the structure was reminiscent of controlling the sails on a ship. A mistake in the settings could result in carbon monoxide filling the dwelling. Ventilation was the #1 priority. The flow of fresh air necessary for combustion and human respiration was provided through the air gap behind the inner lining. The air came in from below, heated up in the gap, and entered the combustion zone already warm. This prevented the oxygen in the living area from being burned up and eliminated the feeling of stuffiness. The system worked like a heat recovery unit in modern homes. People breathed fresh but heated air. The ashes in the hearth were not completely cleaned out every day, as the layer of ash helped keep the coals hot until morning. The ability to preserve the fire overnight was an important skill. The coals were covered with a layer of ash, limiting oxygen access but not blocking it completely. In the morning, it was enough to fan this pile and add kindling to revive the fire in a matter of seconds. This saved time and energy on building a new fire. To cook food in such conditions, hanging pots or stones heated in the fire were used. The steam from the pot also had to escape through the smoke hole without condensing on the walls. Excessive moisture inside was the enemy of thermal insulation, so the pot lids were kept closed. Daily life was subject to strict rules for staying dry and warm. Every action was carefully calculated. In extreme cold, the fire could be made longer by extending it toward the entrance. This increased the area of heat radiation, but required even more careful monitoring of the smoke. Sometimes 2 small fires were used instead of 1 large one for more even heating. This flexible approach allowed adaptation to any temperature. The main thing was to prevent the source of life from dying out. Safety came first. A clear space was always left around the hearth. Sleeping places and belongings were kept at a safe distance from sparks. In confined spaces and with flammable materials, discipline in handling fire was instilled from birth. A fire in a blizzard would mean instant death from cold without shelter. The risk was great, but control was absolute. Fire was a living thing, a partner and protector that demanded respect and care. Do you think you could maintain a perfect fire all night without modern ignition tools? In the next chapter, you will learn what Native Americans slept on to keep from freezing on the icy ground. The ground in winter is an endless heat absorber, capable of draining the life out of a sleeping person in a matter of hours. Therefore, Native Americans never slept directly on the ground, even if it was covered with animal skins. The basis of the sleeping place was a bedding made of willow branches or other shrubs woven into peculiar mats. This plant pillow created an air gap between the body and the frozen ground. Working on the principle of modern tourist foam, the branches also springy, adding comfort to the hard bed. A thick layer of dry grass or reeds, which had been harvested in advance, was laid on top of the branches. Grass has excellent thermal insulation properties, trapping still air inside its stems. This layer could reach an impressive thickness, turning into a real mattress. It was important to ensure that the grass remained dry, as moisture instantly destroyed all its heat-saving properties. Regular replacement or drying of the bedding was part of the routine. The main element of the bed was, of course, bison hides, robes. Winter bison hides are characterized by a thick, dense undercoat that retains heat perfectly. The hides were laid fur side up for the bottom layer and fur side in for covering. The heavy bison hide not only provided warmth, but also blocked any microdrafts that could reach the body. The weight of such a hide created a feeling of security and cocooning. The sleeping places were located around the perimeter of the dwelling, but not close to the outer wall. As we remember, they were separated by an inner lining, creating a warm air corridor. People slept with their feet toward the center, toward the hearth, as the feet freeze first. This radial arrangement allowed all residents to receive an equal share of heat from the central fire. It was the most democratic and effective layout. Special structures resembling bedbacks, woven from willow, were often used for sleeping. They were placed at the head and feet, limiting the sleeping space and protecting from the wind if someone entered the tipi. Additional skins could be thrown over these backs, creating a mini tent over the sleeper. This further localized the heat around the person's body. Comfort was created from small details. On particularly cold nights, people would sleep together under a large fur blanket. The warmth of several bodies combined under one skin worked much more effectively than a single covering. Children and the elderly were placed in the middle, where it was warmest. This was not only a means of survival, but also an important element of social cohesion within the family. Mutual care became physically tangible. Sometimes heated stones wrapped in leather or cloth were used and placed under the blanket at the feet. These ancient hot water bottles could retain heat for several hours, helping to keep warm before bedtime. It was important not to overheat the stones so as not to burn the fur or cause burns. A stone from the hearth was a simple but effective energy accumulator. This method is still used by survivalists today. Pillows were made of soft leather stuffed with animal wool, bird down, or the same dry grass. The head had to be insulated from the cold no less than the body. People often slept in headgear or hoods to minimize heat loss through the head, which can be very significant. Comprehensive body protection was the key to a good night's sleep. Clothes were not usually taken off completely at night, but were loosened. Belts were loosened so as not to restrict blood circulation. Moccasins were taken off and dried, and dry fur stockings were put on. Sleeping in the same clothes worn during the day was risky due to the accumulated moisture from sweat. Therefore, changing into dry, albeit lighter clothes was the rule. Dryness was equivalent to warmth. The entire sleeping system was designed to provide maximum insulation from below and retain body heat. The Indians did not try to heat the entire atmosphere of the prairies. They created micro-worlds of warmth around themselves. This is an effective and wise approach to resources. What if I showed you how snow, which kills all living things with its cold, became the main ally in the fight for warmth? Snow, which is 90% air, is an excellent insulator if used correctly. When a blizzard piled snowdrifts around their tepees, the Indians did not rush to clear them away. On the contrary, they deliberately raked the snow to the base of their dwellings, creating a dense wall around the entire perimeter. This snow wall served as additional insulation. It completely closed the gap between the roof and the ground, eliminating any drafts from below. The wind could no longer blow under the edge of the skin, cooling the floor. The snow wall could reach a meter in height, protecting the most vulnerable area where people slept. It became noticeably quieter and warmer inside immediately after the construction of such a barricade. In addition, the snow embankment acted as an aerodynamic springboard for the wind. The airflow hitting the snow slope was thrown upward, passing above the living area and putting less pressure on the walls. This reduced the vibration of the tire and reduced the noise of the storm. The dwelling seemed to grow into the landscape, becoming part of it, rather than a foreign object. The fusion with nature was literal. However, it was necessary to ensure that the weight of the snow did not push the leather walls inward. To do this, additional struts or bundles of branches were sometimes laid inside, between the poles and the tire. This created rigidity and maintained the air gap for internal ventilation. Engineering thought worked to use the advantages of the material, leveling out its disadvantages. Pressure balance was important. In areas with very deep snow, teepees could be set up in pre-dug pits. The snow walls of the pits served as excellent wind protection, and the dwelling itself was half submerged in snow. This resembled the principle of the igloo of the northern peoples, where snow is the main building material. The temperature in such a sunken dwelling was much more stable than on the surface. The earth and snow provided warmth. It was also important to ensure that the snow did not block the air supply to the ventilation gaps. Experienced residents periodically went outside with bison bone shovels to clear the channels. If the ventilation became clogged, the fire began to smoke, and life inside became unbearable. The fight against snow was not a war of destruction, but rather resource management. Perimeter control was mandatory. Snow was also used as a source of water, but it was never eaten cold so as not to lose body heat. It was melted in cauldrons, providing the necessary moisture without having to go to a frozen river and chop ice. Clean, fresh snow was a safe and accessible resource right on the doorstep. This saved energy and time, which were worth their weight in gold during a storm. Water was underfoot. Interestingly, a layer of snow on the roof of a teepee, if it did not melt, indicated good insulation from the inside. If the snow melted, it meant that precious heat was escaping through the walls to the outside. A well-insulated dwelling remained covered with frost or snow on the outside, keeping the heat inside. It was a kind of indicator of the energy efficiency of the house. Heat loss was the enemy. The use of snow as insulation is an example of adaptation, of turning a hostile environment into a protective shell. Instead of fighting precipitation, it was integrated into the life support system. This principle of Aikido with nature allowed survival, where direct confrontation led to death. The wisdom of the ancestors was practical. Did you know that modern igloos are built on similar principles of thermodynamics? In the next chapter, we will talk about how clothing became a second skin and why the belt needed to be loosened. The clothing of the indigenous peoples of the plains was not just a set of items, but a complex, multi-layered system designed for an active life in the cold. The basis of the wardrobe was tanned leather, suede, which breathed, but at the same time provided excellent protection from the wind. Unlike modern synthetic fabrics, leather did not melt in fire and was incredibly durable. The secret was that clothing was never worn tightly. The air layer between the body and the clothing was the main insulator, working on the same principle as the walls of a teepee. The multiple layers allowed the body temperature to be regulated. The bottom layer consisted of a loincloth and leggings, separate trouser legs that were attached to the belt. This design was more comfortable than regular pants, as it did not restrict movement when walking in deep snow or riding a horse. A shirt was worn on top, followed by a heavy bison cape. Each layer could be removed or added depending on activity and weather. Overheating and sweating were just as dangerous as hypothermia. Footwear deserves special attention. Moccasins were made of bison or deer leather and did not have a hard sole. This allowed the foot to move naturally, maintaining blood circulation, which is the main source of heat for the extremities. A stiff boot squeezes the foot and promotes freezing. Dry grass or wool was placed inside the moccasin, creating a soft, insulating insole that was easy to replace if it got wet. Mittens were made of fur-lined leather and were often tied together with a cord that went around the neck so they wouldn't get lost in the snow. Losing your mittens in a storm could mean losing your fingers or hands. Cuffs were made long to cover the sleeves and prevent snow from getting inside. Protecting the extremities was a priority, as without hands a person became helpless. A special rule applied to belts and ties during sleep or rest. They had to be loosened so that blood could circulate freely throughout the body, delivering warmth to the toes and fingers. Tight clothing slows blood flow and accelerates frostbite. This simple physiological knowledge saved many lives. Comfort was synonymous with safety. Bison capes, robes, were a versatile item: a coat, a blanket, and a windbreaker. They were worn with the fur inside to retain body heat, or with the fur outside in wet weather to keep the skin dry. The designs on the outside of the robe often had magical significance, invoking the protection of spirits, but the layer of paint also further clogged the pores of the skin, making it less windproof. Functionality and spirituality went hand in hand. Women's clothing typically consisted of long leather dresses, which were complemented by knee-length leggings. In winter, these dresses were made of 2 layers of leather or lined with fur. The space under the skirt created a warm air cap that kept the legs warm. Women also used wide capes under which a small child could be hidden and kept warm. Clothing was a home that was always with you. Headwear ranged from simple fur bandanas to hoods sewn onto capes. Ears were protected with particular care. Otter or beaver fur collars were often used, as they did not freeze as much from breath as other types of fur. Protecting the face from frostbite with fat was also a common practice. A layer of fat created a film that protected the skin from direct contact with the icy wind. All clothing was sewn with sinew, which did not rot from moisture and swelled when wet, sealing the seams. Every detail was thought out to the smallest detail and tested by generations. Clothing was an extension of the body, a second skin adapted to the environment. It did not fight the cold, but coexisted with it. Caring for clothing was a constant occupation. Drying moccasins and clothes by the fire every evening was a mandatory ritual. By morning, damp clothing turned into an icy shell that was impossible to put on. The discipline of daily life was ironclad. In extreme cold, the body works like a furnace, requiring a huge amount of high-calorie fuel. The Indians understood perfectly well that it was impossible to warm up only from the outside. You had to warm up from the inside. The basis of the winter diet was pemmican, a concentrate of dried bison meat, ground into powder and mixed with melted fat and berries. It was perhaps the most perfect dry ration in human history. Pemmican could be stored for years without spoiling and had tremendous energy value. A small piece gave a feeling of fullness and a boost of energy for several hours. The high-fat content was critically important, as it is fats that provide long-lasting heat during digestion. Unlike carbohydrates, which burn quickly, fats maintain body temperature throughout a long, cold night. It was the ideal winter food. During storms, when hunting was impossible, the tribe lived off the supplies they had gathered in the fall. The elders and women were responsible for rationing food. They ate small amounts frequently to keep their metabolism active. A hungry person freezes much faster than a full one, so food was seen as a remedy for the cold. Strategic reserves were sacred. Hot food and drink were mandatory at least once a day. Meat broths not only warmed them up, but also replenished lost fluids and salts. Dehydration in the cold happens imperceptibly, but it is deadly dangerous as it thickens the blood and impairs its circulation. Forcing yourself to drink water when you are not thirsty was a rule of survival. Broth was the ideal solution, both food and drink. A distinctive feature of the winter metabolism of indigenous peoples was their ability to digest large amounts of protein and fat without harm to their health. Their bodies were genetically adapted to such a diet. Europeans who tried to eat the same way without being accustomed to it often suffered from digestive problems. For Native Americans, however, fatty bison hump was a delicacy and a source of life. Their diet also included dried roots and berries harvested in the summer. These added vitamins and variety, but meat remained the staple. Sometimes they used raw or cooked bone marrow. It was the purest energy cocktail. Not a single calorie obtained from hunting was wasted. 100% of the prey was utilized. During forced inactivity in the tent, energy consumption decreased, but the need for warmth remained. Therefore, the diet was adjusted, more fat, less volume. This allowed them not to overload the stomach, but to give the body resources for thermoregulation. Their knowledge of the properties of food was deep and practical. Interestingly, chewing dried meat itself helped to keep warm. The process required effort, stimulated blood circulation, and generated heat. In addition, it took time and distracted from the monotony of waiting. Food was both an occupation and entertainment, as well as a lifesaver. Food supplies were stored in special bags made of rawhide, parfleche. They protected the food from moisture and rodents. Parfleche were placed inside the teepee, sometimes using them as additional insulation or pillows. Food was literally the foundation of life. Nutrition was the foundation of the survival pyramid. Without an internal fire, no amount of skins could save a person from freezing. Pemmican was the battery that powered the entire civilization of the plains in winter. When a storm locked people in the confined space of a teepee for several days, the main threat was not the cold, but psychological stress. The ability to remain calm and not waste energy was part of the culture. The Indians had an amazing ability to actively wait. They could sit for hours almost motionless, immersed in their thoughts or a light slumber, slowing down their metabolism and conserving oxygen. Hustle and bustle and unnecessary movement in a confined space not only annoyed those around them, but also raised dust and consumed air and heat. Therefore, an atmosphere of restraint and smoothness reigned inside the teepee. From an early age, children were taught not to run or shout inside the dwelling. Silence or quiet conversation was the norm. It was a form of social politeness necessary for the survival of the group. To pass the time and keep spirits up, stories were told. Winter was the traditional time for legends and myths. Elders passed on their knowledge to the young, telling them about the creation of the world, the trickster coyote, or the exploits of their ancestors. The storyteller's voice in the dim light, accompanied by the howling wind outside, created a hypnotic, calming atmosphere. It was an ancient cinema and school at the same time. Games also helped to cope with isolation. There were many gambling games with dice or sticks that both adults and children played. The excitement distracted from the fear of the elements and made time pass more quickly. Laughter and emotions were important for relieving the stress that inevitably built up in a confined space. Respect for personal space, which was physically very limited, was achieved through strict rules of etiquette. Everyone had their own place, which could not be occupied without permission. There were rules for moving around inside the teepee. For example, you could not walk between a person and the fire. These rituals brought order to life and prevented conflicts. Social support was tremendous. People did not feel alone in the face of the elements. They were part of a single community organism. The awareness that there was a comrade nearby, ready to help, gave a sense of security. A lone individual in the steppe was doomed, but a group was invincible. Prayers and spiritual practices were an integral part of waiting. Smoking pipes, offering tobacco to the fire, and singing quiet songs all harmonized the space. The Indians believed that a storm was a living being that could be negotiated with or simply waited out respectfully. The absence of panic-stricken fear of nature gave them peace of mind. Sleep took up most of the time. The ability to sleep a lot and at any time allowed them to conserve their body's resources and simply switch off their consciousness from unpleasant reality. It was a kind of hibernation, a natural reaction to the lack of light and activity. Conflicts were nipped in the bud. In conditions of isolation, a quarrel could be fatal for everyone. The ability to give in, smooth things over, and turn tension into a joke was highly valued. Social intelligence was as important as the ability to shoot a bow. The blizzard tested not only the strength of the walls, but also human relationships. And the tribes of the plains passed this test with dignity, turning forced confinement into a time of unity and learning. When the howling wind subsided and a ringing silence set in, it was a signal for a new phase of struggle to begin. The exit from the teepee was often blocked by a snowdrift. The first thing to do was to dig out. The inhabitants carefully broke through the snow plug, trying not to let the snow fall inside. Sometimes they had to climb over the top or cut the entrance lacing above the snow level. The men's first task was to check on the horses. The herd was usually driven to a sheltered place, such as a willow grove, where the animals could find shelter and bark to eat. The survival of the horses was critical to the tribe. Without them, they lost their mobility and hunting advantage. Horses were often covered with old skins, and particularly valuable steeds could even be brought inside large teepees. Then the roll call and checking on neighbors began. People went from dwelling to dwelling, helping those who were most heavily buried to dig themselves out, usually the homes of the elderly or widows. Mutual aid was the law. No one began to go about their business until they were sure that all members of the community were alive and well. Solidarity was absolute. Damage assessment was quick and efficient. Wind-torn tires were repaired immediately using bone needles and sinew. If a dwelling was destroyed, the victims were distributed among neighbors until a new house was built. No one was left without shelter in the cold. Hunters immediately set out on reconnaissance. After the storm, Animals were often weakened or stuck in deep snow, which made hunting particularly successful. Fresh meat was the best reward for patience during the blizzard. The prey was shared among everyone, strengthening the tribe's strength after the forced fast. The snow around the camp was trampled down, creating paths between the dwellings. Social life was restored. Children ran out to play in the snowdrifts, and women went about their household chores. The camp came to life, filling with voices and smoke from the fires. Life returned to normal with remarkable speed. Analyzing the storm that had passed was also important. The elders discussed the signs that had foretold it and the behavior of the elements. This experience was remembered and passed on, adding to the tribe's knowledge of survival. Each blizzard that was weathered made the tribe wiser and stronger. If the campsite proved unsuitable for further life, for example, completely covered with snow or deprived of firewood, a decision was made to move on. Winter mobility was difficult, but sometimes necessary. Packing up was as quick as setting up camp. The morning after the storm was a time of triumph, of life over death. The shining sun over the snow-white plain, smoke from the tops of the teepees, and living people. It was a picture of victory. The Indians did not conquer nature. They knew how to live in its rhythm, accepting both its harsh and gentle manifestations. We saw that the safety of the Indians' sleep during a blizzard was ensured not by one magic remedy, but by a complex of ingenious solutions. The aerodynamics of the Tipi, the thermos effect of the inner lining, warm clothing, and high-calorie food. All these are links in a single chain. Remove one link and the whole system falls apart. Their experience teaches us that survival depends not so much on fighting the elements as on understanding their laws and the ability to adapt. Stone Age technologies proved to be surprisingly effective and rational in this regard. Which of these ancient life hacks did you find most surprising? Was it the ozone for warmth or the method of using snow as a wall? Share your opinion in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories about survival in the past.